alongside one part of the UK's most successful businesses and brands, Octopus Group. I'm speaking with Ruth Handcock, CEO of Octopus Money and a member of the Octopus Group main board, whose career has spanned strategic consultancy, overseas investment, and challenger banks. We're going to be chatting about her career ethos of collecting competencies, what gives her the courage to step outside her comfort zone, and how Octopus Money are making money coaching and advice accessible to millions of people across the UK. We're also going to find out how they're redesigning frontline roles so that their employees love the work they do and help their customers to thrive. Welcome to the business of being brilliant, Ruth.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. And I'm really looking forward to getting into all aspects of the conversation, but I'm particularly looking forward to hearing about that last part about how you're redesigning frontline roles, because it takes me back to my very first job when I worked in Harrods on the graduate management training scheme, and I worked in frontline customer service roles in the wine department at Christmas. It was just a baptism of fire, and I am guessing a million light years away from the way customer service is tech enabled today. So I just remember pushing lots of paper around and basically drowning in paper and wine boxes.
I think that's probably true. I had my time on the checkout at Sainsbury's, so that was my first customer service experience. So probably quite similar.
Yeah, but they're so invaluable, aren't they? Those early frontline customer facing experiences from a career point of view.
Completely, absolutely.
Yeah, I learnt loads from that, and it gives you a really strong foundation for whatever avenues you decide to explore after that. And when we were chatting before today and recording, you were telling me about your career path, and you described it as somewhat random, but that there's been kind of, in retrospect anyway, a kind of unifying ethos around the career choices you made. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, it's I've learned over the years to be able to tell my career story in a way that feels coherent, but it's all post-rationalization, which is, as I've gone along, really my guiding principles have been, do I think I'll enjoy it, and am I a bit scared? And if both those things are true, then generally it's something that I'll jump at doing. And over time, I've realized that that's because two things have to be true for me to really thrive in a role. And that's, I need to be outside my comfort zone because I learn more quickly, and I get a lot of satisfaction from learning and doing new things, but I need to be in an environment that feels supportive. And actually for me, supportive is mainly about being trusted. So largely left to get on with it, and given the opportunity to make quick decisions and build something that I believe in. And where both those things are true, I find I really thrive. And in the pieces of my career where those things haven't been true, I haven't enjoyed it half as much. So I had a brilliant coach about 15 years ago who made me write down a list of what needs to be true about a role you want to do. And it was just before I joined a couple of entrepreneurs to start a new challenger bank. And I got this offer to join a bank, and it was really risky. No, there hadn't been any new banks in the UK since Metro, and Metro was the first in 100 years. So it was one of those things that felt, nigh on impossible. But I compared it with these 5 things I'd written down of, is it about sort of purpose and pace? Is it about being out of your comfort zone? Is it about doing something extraordinary? And it was all true. So I thought, well, if I don't take this job, that's because I'm scared, not because it's not the right job for me. So having that framework to refer back to, I think has encouraged me for each leap to probably feel even greater than the last.
Yeah, that's such great advice from that coach. I love the way they framed it. And have those 5 things stayed constant throughout your career, or do you go back to them and update them?
I think they have. So I think this was probably, I don't know, 12 or 15 years into my professional career. So I think they changed a lot over that period. I think in the 10 years subsequent to that, they've stayed pretty constant. Because I think I spent the first 15 years learning what I enjoyed. And I had lots of different jobs in that period, from working overseas to consultancy to being an editor to working in science, all sorts of things. And I realized I needed people around me. I needed a high degree of autonomy. I needed businesses that were about that were about purpose. So those things, I guess I used that time to experiment. Um, and then I guess being a scientist by background, sort of was like, right, here's the output of my experiment. This is then my guiding principles. And who knows, they might change, but they've probably held constant since then.
Yeah. And as I was listening to you talk about how learning and being supported and being trusted are really, really important to you, I wondered if you felt as a leader whether that's what you see other people needing as well, or whether that's just very personal to you. What's your
It's a
take on that as a
great
leader?
It's a great question because I think it varies massively by people, and I think by person. And I think one of the big skills of leadership is being able to bend your style to what the person you're managing needs. And clearly, there's some give and take there. Um, but I've learned over the years that people are motivated incredibly differently. So I really like freedom. I like a North Star and then to be left to define my own goals. Other people thrive actually if you take the North Star, you write a plan and you help them understand what their role in that plan is and everything in between. Some people are motivated by the sort of what are we building? How can I touch and feel it? Some people are motivated by the why, why is this important? Why am I the right person to be doing it? So I actually went through a stage, my first CEO role, um, when I was managing a business of about 400 to 500 people. Every time I presented to a room of people, I'd sit down with my presentation before and think, does this appeal to both heart and head? Because in the room, I'm going to have a mixture of those people. And my instinct is, as I said, I'm a scientist, so my instinct is head. And so I've had to really work on the heart bit, particularly to big roomfuls of people, to make sure it comes across as a mission and a vision and something that's significant in the world. Because I might feel it, but it took me a while to realize how compellingly you have to communicate it if you want different people to be motivated by the plan and the strategy and the vision that you're laying out.
Yeah, that reminds me of when I was in consulting for 15 years, helping big organizations bring people through big transformational changes. And we used to have one slide that described, there's two aspects you absolutely have to focus on when you're going through change. And one is rational, the what, the why we're doing it, and the other is the emotional, and
Yeah,
that's the bit that tends to get forgotten about. And we'll come on to talk about it more a little bit later. But what I'm really interested in and is from what you're doing at Octopus Money. I mean, you could describe it all as the kind of the rational side. This is, our business model and this is how we help customers. But a big part of its success and what you're focusing on is the emotional side as well, isn't it? From the people doing the work to the customers needing the help.
absolutely. I'd say it's sort of almost the opposite. Is people think money is about maths. Money is not about maths. Money is about emotion and how it makes you feel. And when you ask someone how they feel about money, the first thing they'll normally say is something emotional, like, "Oh, it makes me feel stupid. I feel like I'm always losing. I feel like I don't know what I'm doing." It's an emotion, not a, "Oh, I don't know the answer to this maths problem," or "I don't know what I should be doing with my stocks and shares ISA." That's not anyone's first instinct. So I think it's a really common misconception.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, and talking about emotion, you've talked about going outside your comfort zone. Does that always feel fun and exciting for you, or does it feel daunting? And what helps you to do that? Because some people listening might think, "Yeah, that's totally me. Love a good stretch. Love being in the uncertain zone." And taking risks. Other people might be hyperventilating at the thought, thinking that sounds really scary. So, how do you approach going outside your comfort zone?
So I think it's a muscle that you can exercise like any other. So if you rewound and found me at school, I was the kid sitting in the class who never put their hand up. I was very studious. I don't think I put my hand up once in my entire school career. I was very shy. Um, I didn't have particularly high aspirations, but I always worked hard. Um, and I think over time, I've realized it's the sort of delayed gratification that I've learned to thrive on is when I'm first out of my comfort zone. I wouldn't describe it as enjoyment. I might describe it as thrilling or stretching, but not enjoyable. I think that's a different emotion altogether. But the enjoyment and the satisfaction and the pride comes later. And I think as I've pushed myself out of my comfort zone a little bit, then a little bit more, then a little bit more, that feeling of pride is probably the best way to describe it. It gets greater and greater and greater the bigger the leap you take. Um, and you learn to enjoy that, and you learn to expect it when you behave like that. So, if I go from when I first entered the workplace to 10 years later, I was offered a job to go and work in West Africa, in Sierra Leone, in the Ministry of Trade. It couldn't have been further out of my comfort zone, a country I'd never lived in, doing a job I'd never done before, in a culture that I couldn't claim to understand. But you get this immense sense of pride from doing it. But I think had I not taken those little steps along the way, then perhaps I wouldn't have been brave enough, or I wouldn't have even applied for that job in the first place. But when I did, it was sort of career changing and life changing for me to do that. But it didn't happen overnight. And I think if for those people who are sitting there thinking, "Oh my goodness, like what on earth are you talking about? I can't imagine anything worse." It's how you run a little experiment to see whether you do get that pride and you do get that feeling of self-worth afterwards. And if you do and you enjoy it, then maybe you want to do a bit more and a bit more. And if you try and you don't get that feeling, then probably it's not right for you and it's not right for everyone. But there are ways to try it in small, slightly safer ways.
Yeah, I love that mindset that you bring as a scientist. Let's just do a little experiment. And also your advice, don't go for the great big leap, in one go. Maybe build up, and then over time you see, the progress you've made, but also, I guess, what's started to become a bit more second nature to you that might a few months or a year or two ago have felt really quite daunting. I think that's really practical advice. As you were describing, the delayed gratification, you were reminding me of kind of what I feel every day. I go running every day, and I always know that I'm going to be glad I've done it afterwards and feel better for it. But it does feel a stretch and a push, and I'm kind of having to go out the comfort zone, which would be a stay at home and drink tea, right? But afterwards, it's that sense of pride, so it really resonated from a completely different aspect of my life, running. What you were saying about work challenges and pushing yourself out there.
It's exactly it. And I'd never kid myself that it doesn't take self-discipline. So I think people
Yeah.
sometimes underestimate. They think that for some people, running towards the fire is just something that comes naturally. I think that's true of very few people. But I think some people have learned that if you can have just enough self-discipline to make yourself try it, and then you feel that reward afterwards in whatever way that reward manifests for you, that it's worth it. And then that creates a little bit more self-discipline. But that first step, just as when you go out for a run, takes an enormous amount of discipline. And I think, again, one of the things I've discovered is just how different people's deep motivations are. But mine is, I never want to look back and think I could have done something and I didn't. It's why I worked hard at school. It's why I sort of run towards the opportunity. It's that feeling of regret that I'm constantly running away from. And so that for me creates the discipline to try it, and then the gratification if it works. And it doesn't always work either. So
Yeah.
sometimes you run the experiment, it's a complete failure, and you think, well, there's no gratification from that. Maybe I'm proud of having tried it, but I didn't get any enjoyment from it. But I think the discipline for me comes from that feeling of, oh, I'm really going to kick myself. I'm going to be so disappointed in myself if I haven't given it a go. And again, that's a feeling that grows and grows over time.
Yes. Yes. And in terms of going back to business and Octopus Money, what was the motivation there, I guess, behind its launch, but also for you as CEO? What's the motivation um, under the business, that's propelling that business and its mission?
Yeah, so I think at its core, it is a business built to try and create a fairer society. If you really strip it right back, is we live in a society where there has never been a greater gap between those with wealth and those with less wealth. And what you find is that people's outcomes in life are really highly correlated with how much money they have when they're growing up, and that gap is widening, not getting smaller. And I find that a very depressing fact. As someone who grew up in a single parent family without much money, went to my local state school, um, I find it really sad that the environment you grow up in is such a strong determinant of the opportunities you have in your life. So, and to me, that manifests itself in a couple of ways. Is one is how many opportunities you get. Do you get the opportunity to go to the university to get the first job? That's one side. But what I think people are focused on less is this concept of how do I accumulate some wealth? And accumulating wealth isn't about, buying the mega yacht. It's about having enough money that you don't have to worry. It's about being able to get up in the morning and think, I can get through to the end of the month without worrying. And that is a feeling that everyone wants, and I think everyone deserves. But what you find when you look at money in the mass market and you say, where do you go for help? People say, I don't really know. I might go to loads of online resources. There's loads of education. If you're self-directed, you can compare prices, you can research to your heart's content. But that's a little bit different from what you get if you're wealthy, which is you get to sit down with someone and say, this is me, tell me what I should do. And financial advisors are brilliant at that. They will absorb all of that complex information and say, okay, I've ordered all of that for you. These are the 3 steps I think you should take to secure your financial future. So Octopus Money at its heart is doing that for everyone. So everyone can sit down with a real person, ask all those stupid questions that they've never wanted to ask. What's a pension? Is it an investment? How does that work? Here's my situation. Can you help me find some order in this? And everyone comes out with a plan. A plan for the short term. Can I get through to the end of the month without worrying? And a plan for the long term. Can I buy the house, have the child without worrying, retire comfortably? And that's fundamentally what it's trying to do for people for whom that help at the moment is too expensive, and not accessible. Most financial advisors can't make the numbers work for people who have less than £200,000 of money to invest. That's an awful lot of money, and not true of 95% of the population. So that's what Octopus Money is doing.
Yeah, it sounds such a worthwhile and socially responsible, I guess, purpose. I'm curious to know how you do that, because if the demand for your services is very high, there's all this large numbers of people out there who would really appreciate that personalized guidance. How do you meet their needs in a way that is manageable for you as a business?
Yeah, so our model is to combine, in most cases, a financial coach with technology that does the heavy lifting. So for people with wealth to invest, they'll normally engage with a financial advisor. It takes a long time to train to be a financial advisor because you're dealing with financial situations and tax situations that are very complex. For most people, who aren't extremely wealthy, actually your finances are not super complicated. When we're thinking long term, the product mix is relatively low, the amount of variables is relatively low. So we're able to train a coach much more quickly. A coach then uses the technology we've built to build a plan for someone very quickly and easily. So fundamentally, the difference between financial advice and financial coaching is we're able to get someone from I'm completely confused to I've got a plan much, much, much more quickly, with much, much, much less time from the coach, which makes the cost to serve much lower. And from a regulatory perspective, it's the technology that gives any regulated advice. So we can assure that much more easily than with, again, financial advice where the person is giving the regulated advice. And therefore, you need a lot more rightly checking around that individual to make sure that that advice is correct. So it's really unpicking
Mm.
the regulatory model, approaching it in a different way that means that a coach may be able to see 20 clients in a week where a financial advisor would typically see 2 or 3. So you can scale much more quickly, you can train people much more quickly, you can deliver the service at a much lower cost to serve and get an outcome that for people in the mass market feels quite similar. But let's not forget that it's because the scenario they're dealing with is simpler. So it does all sort of make sense when you take a step back. But the financial advice industry in its current form isn't really built in such a way as to deal with the simplicity, which is unusual. Normally industries aren't built to deal with the complexity, but actually in financial advice you find the opposite.
Yes, yeah, that makes complete sense, and I can see how financial advice as an industry is focused on the higher end product and the higher end needs, and a certain slice of the market. And what you're trying to do is democratize that and build, a form of financial coaching that is appropriate for a different population that aren't
It's
the uber
exactly
high
it.
net worth population,
It's
and the one that
exactly it.
most the rest of us live in. Yeah, exactly. And so tell us a bit more about the technology and how you've been using that to redesign frontline customer service roles. Because my understanding is that traditionally, people in call center roles, for example, constantly on the phone to customers all day, very high levels of turnover. It's quite hard to stay engaged and motivated in that role. But you're really proud, I know, of how you've helped create a role, a frontline customer facing role that your employees really love, and that delivers a huge amount of value for you as a business. Tell us how you've made that happen.
Yeah, and it's really critical, and anyone, running customer teams will know that if someone walks into the office smiling, then your customer is way more likely to get a great outcome, because you can tell when you pick up the phone whether someone is smiling or not. So what we've created in coaching roles is a role where fundamentally it goes right back to the conversation we were having earlier about almost what money is. A role where people's primary goal is to connect with the individual they're coaching, just as a career coach or a life coach or any other coach might do. Is really the role is to understand, to listen, to empathize, and not to do complicated calculations, because that's what the technology does. So the tech is designed to be simple enough that it can be calibrated quickly, but visual enough that if you're a client sitting there, you can get a view of your financial life in a way that really makes sense. But what coaches find is that it's a satisfying role, because they're able to, the mission we have internally is to transform lives, and transforming a life is about empathizing and reducing the stress that people feel with money. But fundamentally, it's also about doing something different, because unless you do something different, if your finances aren't in an optimal state, then you're not going to transform your life. So what our technology does is take you from a plan through to, I can execute this plan really easily, and I can transform my life, and I know what to do now, and I can go away and do it. But it means that the coach can concentrate on connection and understanding and empathizing and listening. Um, and so often you can't do that in a frontline role, because you're wrestling with, gosh, how do I get stuff done?
Yeah.
And we'll all have had experiences where you're talking to someone, oh, I'm really sorry, but my computer's frozen. And actually, if you get that bit right, then I think the job becomes enjoyable, and I think the client experience becomes so much more powerful as well.
Yes, absolutely. And you're reminding me of just how often, when I work with teams and help them think through what's helping them make best use of their working time, what's getting in the way of that, a lot of the frustration I hear is about broken processes or technology that's acting as a bottleneck or slowing up their ability to deliver or achieve what they want to achieve. So it's fantastic to hear, you talk about actually your customer service agents aren't wrestling with, how you get stuff done. And I can totally see how that makes the role more enjoyable. But also it just sounds such a human focus at the end of the day. It's two people talking about a problem and one trying to help the other person through whatever that emotion is. And I remember when we talked before, you described it as actually, those conversations are emotional moments for the individual who's sharing the worry or the ambition, perhaps in a more positive way that they have. But I guess it's also true for your customer service agents that at the end of the day, they felt like they've made a really positive impact and helped somebody in a really meaningful way.
Yeah, it's exactly it. And sometimes I get the question of, why isn't this journey 100% tech? Um, and
Mm.
maybe in time parts of it will be, but what I've learned from actually having worked in challenger banking and having seen those early days of robo advice is, most people, when it comes to their money, are not that self-directed. They're not that confident. Um, and so the reason that people don't do anything towards a long-term financial plan, it's not because they're not capable of um, reading all of the education that's out there in the world and making decisions. It's they don't get round to it. And when it comes to pressing the button to say, oh, should I increase my pension contributions or should I invest? They want someone holding their hand through that because they've never done it before. Just as you wouldn't, if you were ill, you wouldn't completely self-diagnose on Google. You might do that to start with, then you're going to go to a doctor because fundamentally you need someone who knows what they're doing to say,
to
actually,
guide.
yeah, your sort of Googling was right, or no, actually you can't self-diagnose, so you need someone else to do that for you. And money is much the same. And what we find actually is we deliver the service predominantly in partnership with employers. So there's a real trend that I think while employers have increasingly felt a role in providing physical healthcare and in more recently mental health care, I think financial healthcare is the next horizon actually for employers for a few reasons, partly because all of those things around productivity and effectiveness, which is why employers want to support their employees, are true of money as well, if not more true. I mean, there's incredible correlation between mental health and financial health. Um, but also because if you're an employer, particularly over the last couple of years, you've been through a period of quite difficult conversations about salary in a high inflation environment. And it's ever harder to make that conversation about more than what's my percentage pay rise, but yet you're paying pension contributions. You probably have protection for those individuals. You've probably got health insurance. You've probably got all sorts of other things that employees fundamentally don't understand. So the other role of a coach is they can put all of that in context for someone's long-term life. So for an employer, it takes the conversation from how much am I getting paid to kind of what family am I part of? What's the whole package of things that I've got to look after you, and how do I understand those in the context of my life? And that takes a person, in my view. And, maybe it'll take an avatar in a few years, but right now it takes a person.
Yes, yes. So it helps the employer because they're better able to help their employees understand the full value of all the benefits that perhaps they get as well as their salary. And obviously it helps, it's a means of support to employees who might be worrying in some way about their current or future finances. So it's another valuable benefit that employers can offer. But from what you were saying earlier in the conversation as well, about creating a fairer society, I guess this offering this is also, as an employer, also supports your diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda, right? Because you are trying to support everybody in your organization with their financial well-being, and you're not, as perhaps I guess traditionally is the case, been focusing that on your higher earners or your partners or whatever who might have had a bit more access to that kind of help in the past.
It's exactly it. So I think we're past the age where any employer is comfortable saying, I've got this service for my high earners and not for everyone else. So I think to me that's table stakes now, is um, if you want to help your employees with their finances, that has to be for everyone. The second point is, I think, sort of uh, ongoing in an employee's life cycle. I think things like social diversity and wealth creation are going to become bigger themes in DE&I over the coming years than they have been. So social background is obviously it's an invisible diversity characteristic, and as such, not many workplaces measure it and not many workplaces monitor it. But yet, actually, when you dig into the statistics in financial services where I work, it's astonishing. It's something like 90% of CEOs in financial services went to a private school. And yet we're all responsible for creating products that work for everyone. So something has to change, because I don't think at the moment in my industry we can claim that the social diversity of leaders is representative of the customers they serve. And one of the reasons people often drop out of the workplace is because if you apply for that promotion, it's a risk. You stretch yourself. What if it doesn't work? What if I lose my job? If you don't have a financial safety net, you are way less likely to apply for that stretch role, because you're worried that if the worst happens and you fail, you're in trouble. You can't pay your mortgage, you can't pay your rent. Where if you have a financial safety net, you stretch and stretch and stretch. You might start your own business. We all know the stats about entrepreneurs being much more likely to come from independently wealthy backgrounds. So, how do we give everyone that feeling of a financial safety net such that they can have the career they want to? And then it becomes self reinforcing, because if you take the stretch, you probably increase your earnings, and then you probably are able to accumulate more wealth. So, one of the things we really focus on is financial confidence, and that feeling of a safety net of I can take the risk and the consequences will not be too dire. Um, and I think that's really important. There are also moments. So some employers we work with focus on moments where they know money is a particular worry for people. So parenting is one. Often um, parents returning to work look at their finances over the course of a year and say, "Oh, the cost of childcare, I should probably work part-time or not work, because this year I will be better off if I stay at home." What people rarely do is say, let's look at the next 10 years and let's look at the impact on my earnings. Female
Mm.
salaries plateau much before male salaries, because many women, when they first start families, take decisions at that point that may well be right for their families, absolutely, but actually if they looked at them in the perspective of the next 10, 20, 30 years of their life and realize the impact on their ongoing earnings and their pension, they might actually just do that maths in a slightly different way. So those interventions can be incredibly powerful, and not designed to change anyone's mind about what's right for their family, but might just give them some inputs that lead them to make a decision that they wanted to make in the first place, but they just couldn't. Um, they didn't think they could make the maths work, and maybe they can.
Yeah, just looking at the bigger picture, the longer term. And what you say is so, so true. I even did the maths weirdly myself quite recently. My daughter's 12, and I didn't work for 2 years until she was two, just did bits and pieces from home. And then have always worked part time and gone for more flexible roles. So, inevitably, taken a hit on my career earnings and my career investment, pension investments. And I tried to work that out the other day. And I tell you, I nearly fell over the
Yeah,
shock of effectively the financial cost of that to my potential career earnings. So it's very stark, I think. We could probably carry on talking about that for ages, but I'm conscious we've been having a really, really fun and really fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to us about your career and about Octopus Money. For people that want to find out more about Octopus Money, maybe they're listening and thinking, oh, I think our employer should get to know you a little bit, find out more, or if they want to connect with you personally, what's the best way for people to do that?
yeah. So come to our website and you can book a trial, or find me on LinkedIn. The best ways to do that.
Okay, great. And I'll pop links to both those things in the show notes. It's been such a pleasure talking with you and understanding better the ways in which we think about and feel about money, about hearing how we can experiment like using a muscle in terms of going outside of our comfort zone, but also thinking about safety nets and what gives us the confidence, both financially and in our career paths, to go forwards with greater confidence. So thank you very much for being a brilliant guest.
Thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed it.